That was a great presentation. So thank you and good afternoon, everyone, for being here today. It's a pleasure being with you. So hopefully at the end of this presentation, you will have a better understanding of the effect of change, whether it is on people, your enterprise, or yourself, and why people react to change the way they do. I will also present a few models illustrating the different phases we go through when we are faced with change. I will then highlight a few challenges that are often encountered when dealing with change. And finally, I will list a few tips to help manage change in general. Also, at the end of the PowerPoint, which you'll have a copy after the presentation, I have included a list of references for those of you who would be interested in knowing more about change management. So, without further ado, let's jump on this adventure of change management. So, culture change and change management are very trendy topics nowadays, and for a good reason, actually. With the increasing competitiveness, the globalization, the innovations, all the technological advancement and discoveries, well, things, they literally move fast, very, very fast. What was there yesterday will probably be replaced by something else tomorrow, forcing us to let go of our very comfortable slippers and get into new shoes, probably not as comfortable to keep up with the beat. And as Charles Darwin mentioned, it is not the strongest species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It is the one most adaptable to change. That statement can definitely be applied to today's fast-paced business world, and many companies survived, or not, to prove it. Mr. Edward Deming, who is best known actually for his 14 points, which are the basis of the total quality management movement, suggests that actually we indeed do have a choice. We can think of Kodak, who did not know how to take the digital turn, or Homer, who did not take into account the increase of price of gas and in turn the impact on the environment. Actually, nobody wanted to pass for a shameless polluter, so though their business, they're not there yet. Blockbuster, we all know what happened to Blockbuster. They were the king of movie rentals, but they actually made more money with late fees than with rentals. And here's a fun story about Blockbuster. There was one customer in particular that actually changed the fate of Blockbuster after paying a late fee of $40 for the movie Apollo 13. Imagine, $40 at the time for a cassette. This customer was named Reed Hastings, who's actually the founder of, yes, Netflix. Actually, Netflix prides himself to be the competitor who does not charge late fees. We wonder where that comes from. And ironically, in 2000, Blockbuster declined to buy Netflix for only $20 million. Well, we know the rest of the story, right? A more recent example is Sears, who pioneered actually the concept of online orders, but who did not capitalize on its expertise and preferred to do like others and open big box stores, which actually limited their ability to compete, and well, they're not around anymore. So how to change in order to be able to adapt and so survive? I would go even further. How to make change an intrinsic part of how we do business in order to always renew ourselves and remain relevant to customers, because that really is the goal. Well, Mr. Deming suggests that indeed we do have a choice, that it's not necessary to change. I actually like to use this quote with my teams, especially when we get to a point where we collectively need to reflect on our lack of sense of urgency to make change happen. The reason I like this particular quote is because it has the same emotional effect on my team that it had on me when I was a 6-year-old kid actually reading a poster at the dentist's office. Imagine. You know, the kind of poster that they install on the ceiling to keep you busy during the torture, and all my apologies to the dentist on this call, sorry, but, well, it read as follows. You don't need to take care of all your teeth. Oh, my 6-year-old lazy mind was so happy to read that. until I continued reading. Only the ones you want to keep. Damn. So I think that was the very first time I realized that I had the power to choose, but with my choice came real consequences. There was a price to my decision. So when I read Mr. Deming's quote to my team, it is not necessary to change, I can see the relief in their eyes when I tell them it is not necessary to change. But then I keep on reading. Survival is not mandatory. And I can see that they immediately understand the choices before them. They do not always like the binary choices they have to make because at that point, it becomes personal. You cannot force someone to take a decision. They have to own it because there will be consequences related to that decision. As human beings, we do not like change. It is disturbing and very uncomfortable. But you know as well as I do that change will sometimes happen whether we want it or not, particularly in our work environment. So obviously, companies consider survival essential and therefore will take action to make sure changes happen. Some of the following changes will be very familiar to you. Mergers and acquisitions, for example, are usually very drastic changes that impact deeply people. Could be also a new strategic plan, vision, or a mission that you are implementing in your company that are redefining roles and responsibilities. Innovation also can sometimes require changes at different levels. Could also be a new leadership team or simply just a new boss that can bring new ways of doing things to which we will need to adapt. And also the ones that we may encounter more frequently is probably changes in procedure, processes, to ensure a better service and a better efficiency or quality. So the reason I've said the journey of changes is never ending is exactly for all those examples that you are bound to face within your career. I cannot think of a contemporary job that does not require some level of adaptability. But as I mentioned, change is not easy for anyone, and let's see what I mean by that. So statistically, a population can be represented with a normal curve, which is what you see. Considering that a company is similar to a small community, just to simplify, let's assume that this normal curve applies to all the employees in a company. On this curve, you have on the left-hand side the leaders. You certainly have people like that who embrace change because they want something new, they are motivated, and they feel that they can finally play a part and most of all be heard. They usually account for 5 to 20% of your workforce. Then you have the early adopters, the ones that say, maybe, let's see. They did not come forward when you announced a new project because they were not sure what it would cost them, what it would be worth it. Would it really require a lot more work and will it be fun? So they're just waiting to see, maybe I'll go, maybe I won't, I'll see. Then on the other side of the curve, you have the late adopters. Those who are more skeptical, those who have seen too many changes happen without real results, or even with negative results for them. They're asking themselves, why would I involve myself in something that will probably fail again? Let's keep my energy for something else. So these late adopters need proofs and concrete results to start to see the benefits. And finally, we have our resistors. They also represent 5 to 20% of your employees, and I'm pretty sure you have some pictures in your mind of people that may be in that category. They sometimes have a lot of influence in their circles, and they can be loud and convincing. We have a tendency to try to convert those toughest resistors, been there, done that, to spend more time with them than others, because what a victory it would be to be able to make them see the light and have them as apostles of your change, right? Well, don't forget that by doing that, we are actually neglecting 80% of the people who might be want to be part of the change. So where should we put our energy? Well, my advice, not on the resistors. For the time being, consider them a lost cause because only them can make the decision to switch their minds around, whereas the others already have an opening for change. Just don't get me wrong, you also need resistors up to a point. As I mentioned, do not spend most of your energy on this group, but at least listen to them. They usually are the ones who have difficulty with change and are what I call the guardians of the old ways of doing things. They usually have a very good and very long memory of the things that happened and may be able to tell you what worked or not before in the past. And it may save you some time and effort by acknowledging this information and at least take it into consideration when you develop your change project. But why do people react so negatively to a change in their environment or their ways of doing things? Well, Dr. Sheen, who is a guru in organizational culture, organizational learning, and change, said the following: human minds need cognitive stability. Therefore, any challenging or questioning of a basic assumption will release anxiety and defensiveness. That quote brings us to the science of change. Why do change release anxiety and defensiveness, as Dr. Sheen mentioned? Well, there is a Dr. Antonio Damasio who did research in neuroscience, and he has shown that emotions play a central role in social recognition and decision making. On that subject, I strongly invite you to watch his TED Talk. It is highly interesting and will explain in a lot more detail than I can cover today the emotional part of change. So I have put the link at the end of the presentation. But let me give you a real life example to briefly illustrate Dr. Amasio's theory. On a nice Saturday morning, I was sitting on my couch reading the newspaper as usual with a nice cup of coffee. From the corner of my eye, I saw something moving fast along the wall. Oh my God, that's not normal. It's a mouse. It's a mouse, and I hate mouse. So what happened? I jumped on the sofa yelling, "It's a mouse." So Dr. Damasio is right. He says that when we approach change, well, in that case, change was approaching me, the emotion, not the logic, triggers first. Then those emotions induce a direct reaction, which in my case was fear. So a few milliseconds passed, well, seemed to me like an eternity, but then my brain seemed to process the information differently. It was actually a false alarm. Let's calm down. It was only a fur ball from my Charlotte, my sweet shedding dog. And the fur ball was moving simply because, well, my windows were open. So why did I react so strongly for a moving fur ball? What exactly happened? Well, let's turn to neuroscience to have a brief explanation. Dr. Damasio's research shows that emotion, in my case, the sight of my mouse, which trigger my fear of those little things, is first registered by the amygdala, the emotion part of the brain. At the same time, exactly at the same time, a chemical reaction is triggered in the body to react to this emotion. In my case, jumping on the sofa and irrationally yelling, "There's a mouse." This is the reaction that comes from our primal brain, which holds our survival instinct, the fight or flight. Then the process can start to happen once the danger is no longer immediately threatening, and my emotion is then processed by my cortex, the thinking part of the brain, and will analyze and compare this experience to different possibilities. Only then will I realize that the mouse is not moving on its own, that it does not have any legs or face, and coincidentally looks like the fur ball that I threw away yesterday in the garbage. Of course, it took me longer to explain this process than the time it takes for the process itself to take place. It takes like milliseconds, literally. But how does neuroscience theory apply to changes in our industry, in our company? Well, maybe you really do have mice problems that terrorize your employee. I hope not. But allow me to give you an example of my first days as a continuous improvement director to illustrate the concept. My mandate as the Director of Continuous Improvement was to implement an operational excellence program in a plant that has had a very directive management structure for over 30 years. This implementation coincided with the retirement of the actual general manager, and he would be replaced with someone who had a totally different style of management, a lot more participative. Therefore, the employees were facing two changes: a change in management and a change in the way of doing things with the operational excellence program. I think you would agree to say that these are very disruptive changes for any employee. So the first days in my role, I was highly motivated, full of optimism and energy, and I went on the shop floor to get a feel of where we stand in terms of continuous improvement, and also to start putting together my teams to work on urgent projects. It was not very hard to find my leaders. I actually call them my cheerleaders. They come to you and respond very positively when you approach them. But that was the only positive response I got. If you remember the normal curve of change a few slides ago, these were my 5 to 20% of employees who were the leaders. The rest, up to 95%, were the early adopters, the late adopters, and the resistors who needed to be convinced before opening their minds to change. This is quite a lot of people, many people. I had reactions of sarcasm, aggressiveness, indifference, and even blunt refusal to talk to me from the rest of the employees. And that was disturbing to me because in my mind, I was coming with such a great program that would make everyone's life easier by finding better tools to work with, getting rid of old processes, implementing employee ideas. So why were they so negative? I then started to read on the subject and found Dr. Damasio's explanation, which totally makes sense. When I suggest a change, they don't think I'm the harmless pure ball of fluffy, inoffensive things. They think I'm the mouse. So they react accordingly. And that's the emotion that I bring, aka my change project, triggers a reaction of opposition and self-protection by the employees. The emotion and the reactions happen at the same time. It is the survival instinct that kicks in. So they needed time. They have not yet processed that I'm not the threat, but an opportunity. I then started to slow down my recruitment and just talked with the guys so they get to know me. I did not push them, I just listened. Slowly and gradually the wind turned and they were more receptive to what I had to offer. But never underestimate the impact of change on people. It takes time to fully process the emotions and see what's in it for them. But how can people fully process these emotions? How can we get our employees to become enthusiastic about the changes that are taking place? Well, let's look at a few models that explain that process. There are many theories on change and the stages a person needs to go through to embrace the change and get involved in the new situation. As we are dealing with humans, it's not a surprise to see that these models all refer to emotions. We go through a full gamut of emotions as some models depict. We'll not go through all these models as they all have their particularities and could each be the topic of another hour of talking. But all in all, they all refer to stages of emotions a person needs to experience. All of these models suggest more or less three stages. The first one is the grief for what you know is now past. Then you have to go through a neutral zone where you wait to see what will happen, and when you gather more information to better comprehend what is happening. And finally, there is a new beginning where you embrace the change and it becomes your new norm. These are what I call the psychological models as they refer to emotions. Other types of models are more Cartesian, like the organizational model, and some are more methodical, like the hierarchical models. Many other models exist, such as sociological, political, incremental, and many others. So I have listed a few references at the end of the presentation for those of you who would like to know more about those. But the most important recommendation of all is to make sure that you take care and address the three assets of a human being while you transition in a culture change or any change at all for that matter. His hands, which are the tools that he uses every day at work, represent the organizational model with step-by-step approach, but also his head for ideas and the rational part of the process, and most of all, his heart and passion. And I might add emotions, which will be present at all times during this transition. The models presented address those three essential parts of our engaged employees to help them manage transition. So far, if we recap a little bit, we have seen that change is omnipresent. And as humans, even though we all are different, the normal curve indicates it, we all react to change the same way, emotion and reaction. The only difference is the speed or pace at which we progress. The emotions are triggered by change and go through the three phases of change, so the grief, the neutral zone, and the new beginning. So how do you manage these different paces and speeds in your business? Let's go to the managing part of change. So these are two models that you see that I use with my teams, as they are more clear than others and quite easy to understand. So on both graphs, the left-hand side is full of strong and negative energy. So when a change happens, it's a shock for everybody. And emotions. And on the right-hand side, we have made it out of the valley of despair that I call, and are moving to clearer skies by accepting the new ways. So if we take the first graph, the change curve, you have 4 stages. So the first stage, the status quo. So people have just learned that, for example, there's a merger and acquisition, and they're waiting to see what's going to happen. But then the news comes through that it's official, we are moving through, changes are happening, so there is some disruption. So related to that, there is anger and there's fear. Then they are in the valley of despair because they don't know what the future looks like yet, and they know they have to let go of the past. So they're waiting to see what's going to happen. So then they go in an exploration phase, which is, let's see, let's get more information, let's see how people react, how my colleagues are doing. And then when they know that it's good for them and they can see what's in it for me, that it's beneficial, well, they are on the curve of rebuilding and rebuilding themselves to get to the new beginnings. Never forget that as leaders, you play a big role in your employees' transition through their emotions. So the emotions that you have there, the reaction, shock, denial, anger, fear, acceptance, and commitment. Your main goal should be to help them get out of the valley of despair as soon as possible by giving them support, clear information, coaching, clear examples of what the future looks like so they can imagine themselves in it. Never also forget that the longer they stay in the valley of despair, the harder it will be to get them out. So a negative person contaminates a lot of people in its path. There we go. So what exactly is encompassed in what we call change management? Well, William Bridges makes an interesting difference between the terms change and transition. Change is situational and happens without people transitioning. Like, for example, mergers or acquisition, changes in management, new policies being implemented. So the change is taking place. So it's something punctual that happens. The transition is psychological and is a 3-phase process where people gradually accept the details of the new situation and the changes that come with it. So even though the term change has been mostly used throughout this presentation, it mainly refers to the transition process that accompanies a change. So they go through all the phases that you see on the graph there. John Clutter, who's a Harvard Business School teacher, who's really well known for the leadership and change documentation that he did, is a big fan of emotional connections, mainly because they trigger the sense of urgency, but also because they appeal to the heart and the mind of people in the organization, and what he calls boosting the emotional IQ. So if you notice, all the models refer to emotion that one person needs to experience and overcome in order to fully transition to the new way of doing things. We've talked about the science of change, or why we react to change the way we do, but once we process the information, how do we evolve our train of thought to fully adopt the change and be enthusiastic when not long ago we were very angry and in denial? Well, Cutter suggests that without emotional connection, the transition cannot happen. A few techniques to help with this is, example, the daily huddles, which are short to the point meetings that help connect to your team and increase the communication. And that's the key word, communication. This is where you can feel where in the change curve your teams are. Are they still in denial, or are they in the valley of despair, or they're starting to see the light? Also, to help with the emotional connection to the new process, some KPI charts with pictures of clients, for example, so people can be reminded that the person is their client, not a company name. Could also be get to the emotional connection in brainstorming by using the Bono 6-AT method, which is asking the participants to name their emotions toward a project. You can also visit customers to have a more personal connection. But the Bono is a proponent of teaching, of thinking as subject in school, goes even further than Cutter when it comes to making change happen. He not only connects emotions to a motivation to change, but he puts an even more important emphasis on perception. So he says, logic will never change emotions and behavior. Trying to persuade people logically to change emotion is useless in practice, and most people have experienced this. It is perceptions that control emotion, and emotions control behavior. Changes in perception will change emotions and therefore behavior. If your perception changes, you have no choice, your emotions and behavior change too. So I'll give you an example that I've lived of that emotional connection and perspective. So I used to work for a packaging company who was manufacturing high-end boxes, and we had some recurring problems with quality on our gluing line for one specific client who had very complex packaging. So the perceptions from the employees for that particular product was that the client was very picky and really complained for details. The perception was bringing up negative emotions, and the behavior that ending up being that the employees did not care about finding a solution to the problem because they perceived it as trivial and unjustified. So we decided to put together a SWAT team of operators, line workers, people from the quality department, project manager, one person from maintenance, and a supervisor. And we all paid the visit to the clients to see firsthand their production line and where our boxes were used. Well, needless to say that our team was totally impressed. Our client's production line was huge and had so many steps involved that if one step went wrong, it stopped all the process. As we were present, we witnessed our product being run that day, and guess what? A problem occurred. So our team could witness firsthand the frustration, the stress, and the challenges that one bad box coming from our plant could cause. So our 2-hour trip back to the plant was extremely productive. The SWAT team has become the best advocates of quality because they could tell their teammates what they have experienced, seen, and discussed with employees from the client company. Fantastic solutions were found, and the client was extremely happy with the increasing quality of our product, which made our employees very proud. The new perspective they experienced changed the perception they had and therefore changed their emotions and behavior. So emotions can definitely empower the employees and have them become active change agents. So if you want people to change, get them to feel differently. The neuroscience is behind it. The emotion brain is much faster than the thinking one. So I'll leave you to read that funny article about motivation from the end user, actually. But what are the challenges that you can encounter when managing change? There are a few, as you can imagine. So in his article, Accelerating Corporate Transformation, Robert Miles identifies 6 mistakes that can derail our company's attempt to change. Well, you need all the management team on board and aligned to succeed in everything you try to implement, that's for sure. So if you don't have them on board, you cannot succeed. Also, he suggests not to spread your workforce on too many projects at once. Concentrate on the priorities because change is hard for people to manage, so don't make too many changes at once. Speed is of the essence, so cascade responsibilities. And most of all, don't lose focus because you're tired after a while because it's a very intense thing to do when you do changes, but the work is not finished. It's only the beginning. So in that same article, Miles suggests a very short path to implement change. And he quotes in that same article, he quotes some CEOs that he interviewed, and they all said we should have and could have moved faster. So really, the pace of the implementation of change is critical, because if you make it too long, you're going to lose the momentum. So Bourne, who's another researcher, he suggests some key tips to meet the hard times with confidence. So he says, forecast realistically, set trigger points, also make improvements rather than cutting costs. Be creative about the cost you cut, make changes sooner rather than later, be realistic about performance targets, and tough times need leadership, not management, very important. And also, hard times present opportunities as well as create threats. The marathon effect is a concept brought forward by William Bridges, who actually wrote a very interesting book on change management. The marathon effect is quite simple. Imagine a marathon on a bridge or on a street. When the go is given, you have the first runners in the front who can go, right? Then the middle pack is getting ready because they see some movement in front of them, but the persons in the back are still wondering if the go was given, so they just stay in place waiting for their turn to come. If we translate that, if we do a parallel with what happens in companies in time of change, well, let's take that example on the screen. Before the merger, let's say we take a merger acquisition as a change. So before the merger, there is an actual culture that exists in the company. So the employees know how things are done and they know their jobs. Suddenly comes a merger. So that's the start of the race. The corporate office, so the little green square, well, they talk about strategies. They define the rollout for the merger to happen. During that time, the average employee, so the orange box on top, they hear bits and pieces of what's going on, and they just decide to wait. So in the race, they see something moving in front of them, but it's still far, so they don't move, they wait. Then there is an official statement from the corporate office, which happens at the blue square. So a new culture needs to be implemented because we are merging with another company, the arrival of a new culture. So it's not gossip anymore, it is reality that kicks in, and the realization that they need to start to change and do things differently. So the first runners of the middle of the pack are leaders from the normal curve. They start running, but the ones behind them are still waiting. For the green square, their first part of the job is done. So they have defined all that was needed to make change happen. They went through their grieving process, the neutral zone, and finally embraced the new beginnings, and they start on the new big project. As for the average employee, they still have to go through all the emotions that a big change like that brings, and some employees will never exit the transition, the late adopters and the resistors. So it is critical for the leadership team to recognize this phenomenon, otherwise the employees will not be able to cope with these major changes. So as a wrap-up, it's like an ecosystem. It may seem simplistic, but it's easy to forget a few things. That the change driver, which were, for example, the corporate people, has had time to go through the change process and is ready and eager to implement it. The same change driver transfers the information of the change to the change receiver, the employees. What will be the change receiver's first response? Emotions, and they are not processing. The change driver will assume that the information has been transferred and is expecting the change receiver to act on the new instruction. But the change receiver is only slowly processing the new information and is emotionally finding the impacts these changes will have on him. So, how to succeed? Well, hopefully this rudimentary illustration will synthesize the major success factor, including the dual perspective on change as inspired by Equation of Success from Carton. So the biggest challenge in a transition of culture is really to assess where people are in their curve of change and to assist and coach them so they can finally accept and embrace the new culture. So the change drivers, they really have to make sure that they stay ethical, that they have the right persons in the right place, that they empower employees, have flexible and open-minded change agents, they communicate positively, very, very important, and simplify that vision that we are aiming to. Integrate the human aspect and its psychological components, and reassess periodically their progress. Very important because some people may still be at the end of the race, so they need to bring them with them. To assist the change receivers, so the employees, we must make sure that we know our people and their adaptability level. We need to respect that level of adaptability as it is personal. Each person will go through the curve of change at a different pace. Acknowledge their grief and the loss. Quick wins are everywhere, so look for them. And patience, patience, patience. It's not something that happens as fast as we would like because we're dealing with humans here. And work on a common vision, train the workforce to be flexible. And the relation between the change drivers and the change receivers, you must be sure to develop and increase the level of confidence. People must trust where you're heading, otherwise they will not follow you. Consider the environment in the change decision and the strategy, and plan ahead the communication strategy for the cultural evolution. That's key because you will need to communicate all the time. And then there is the time factor that we must take into account because we need to properly evaluate the duration of the change because other change will come. So we cannot have one project that will last forever. We need to differentiate the time perceived and real time to evaluate the pertinence of the moment and to be able to balance during the change process. So those are really success factors that we need to take into account. And I was talking about communication, so just a funny quote that I saw, but it is so true. Please repeat, and repeat the message. You'll never repeat it often enough. Only one simple message, one message at a time with clear words so people can understand. So if I come back to the title, change is indeed never ending. And it is indeed an everyday adventure because you don't know where it will take you. But one thing is sure is that if everyone understands that we are all on the same boat, we know where we are going, we know how we will get there, and we have the right tools to get there, well, we have great chances of getting there. So these are success factors that I've experienced, and I really, really strongly suggest them to you. So ask questions, talk to your people. Get the feeling of where they are in the transition curve. Also, train your leaders thoroughly. Make sure that they understand and adhere to the new ways. As a leader, you're always on stage and people are looking at you to know what behavior to adopt. Involve people also in defining, empower them to find solutions, learn from mistakes, put the urgency on changing the process, not the people. Very important. Sometimes we have a tendency to point fingers at people, but look at the process. That's where it needs to be improved, not the people. Acknowledge the past. People wonder sometimes, why are we changing? Things were working great. Well, acknowledge that what they've done is good because you are where you are because good things have happened. Good things have been done in the past. Now we just need to move forward because the market has changed, things change. Give coaching and support. Also learn to celebrate your victories and successes, small and big ones. And most of all, I think have fun is really the key to change. So maybe some of you have already seen this image. Even though I don't know the official source, I've decided to include it in this presentation just to remind us that there is a fine balance that needs to exist between different factors to achieve a successful change. It's not only to work on one aspect, but many at the same time, to have a global vision of the situation in order to make sure everything is optimized for success. So we've barely scratched the surface of that fascinating topic, in my opinion, but the best way to know more about it is to try it. And that's it. May you have a wonderful journey in managing changes and transitions with your team. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Sandra. If anybody does have questions for Sandra, please go ahead and use the chat box. And we can wait here for a moment or so as you do that. And while we're waiting, reminder once again that our second webinar for July will be next Tuesday, July the 17th. It is influencing without authority because you are a project manager with Carl Pritchard, Pritchard Management Associates Incorporated. Looks like we are getting some questions here. Sandra, we'll start. What is the best way to respect the employee during their initial emotional response? Not a good time for conversation, but walking away can seem cold and uncaring.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think one of the good ways to make sure that you have a good relationship with your employees during the change management is to make them aware that it will be normal, that they will go through this curve of change with all these emotions. They will have these emotions, and that is normal. Everybody will have them. They just need to understand that we will not have them at the same pace. It's not because they have those strong emotions that anybody's allowed to do anything, but at least to recognize that. So I feel uncomfortable because we're changing. I used to do my job very easily because I knew what I was doing, but now, you're taking that away from me. I've been working here 30 years and I don't want to learn new things. So it's all things we're going to have to face with employees, but I think respect is one of the key points. Respect your employees, support them, coach them, talk with them. What I've done also is pair people together. So people who were leaders, the 5 to 20% of the people who were very let's go. I've paired them with people who were not so sure, so they could see the picture of what it looks like in the future. So always communicate what the future will look like so they get more comfortable about saying, okay, I can see myself playing a role in there. Where they become uncomfortable is when they don't see themselves in the future picture. So I think by talking to them, reassuring them, coaching them, and really letting them know that it's a normal state to be, and it's a normal also reaction to have, an emotion to have, it will help the people to go through that. So.
Okay, Sandra, we're getting a couple of questions here from folks asking if you would share the links to other information sources that you said you were going to share when we first started the talk.
Absolutely. I can show you here, but I can send it to you, Norval. The references that are there, so you'll have all the literature and the links to the TED Talks and everything.
Okay, great. If you could leave that up there here momentarily, I think some folks may be very interested in looking at that. We are continuing to see other questions come across. The next one is, when dealing with a merged organization, can you suggest ways to align practices without creating conflict because of selecting one group's practices over the others?
Absolutely. The best way is to get everybody that is impacted, if you want, directly by the change, and let's talk. Let's have a talk about what goes well in your way of doing things, what goes well in my way of doing things, and at that point it's only a discussion and it's opinions. But the way to remove the emotions from that is really to go with facts. So if they think, let's say, company A is merging with company B, and we're looking at, I don't know, the invoicing process of both companies, and company A says, well, we have a fantastic process, it's much better than what you have. Well, that's fine if you think so. Let's measure it. So how long does it take from cash to cash, for example? How long does it take to get your payment? So with numbers, we will be able to compare objectively things. And then it's hard to say that when you're like 50 times faster than the other company. It's hard to say, well, you know what, let's keep our way of doing things. So when you have people coming together and talking about facts and not emotions, it helps with the discussion because the emotions are not present and everybody can only agree on facts when they're so clear. So I think that's really one of the things that helps a lot, is really have people map the process and talk about numbers and not their stories or how they do things. It's really, it has to be factual. It helps a lot. I don't know if that answers the question, but
Well, if it didn't, I'm sure we may get another question based on what you just said. Let's see here. Looking through what we have here, you did mention at the beginning too that you would be sharing a PDF copy of the slide deck with us, and if you send that to me, I can make sure that folks get to see that. We are going to follow up with folks through email here later today, requesting some feedback. We'll send a survey link as well as the link to the recording. I did remember to record it this time, unlike last time when I should have, and it did not get recorded last time. It's the first time it had ever happened, but we did get things recorded today, which is great. So we will also attach a PDF copy of the slide deck to the follow-up as well. We're not seeing any other questions coming through, Sandra. If people think of questions later, are they welcome to contact you? Easy for me to say.
Absolutely. I will add a slide in my presentation with my email address and cell phone. So at any time, feel free to contact me. It will be a pleasure to talk with you.
Great. Thank you. We're not seeing any other questions coming up. I guess that's probably all we're going to see. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and call it a day. Would like to thank Sandra once again for presenting for us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
And we'd also like to thank you all for coming online with us today. This is the first of 4 webinars for the month of July, so there are 3 more coming up, and all of them are on successive Tuesdays at noon Eastern Time. So if you have not registered for those, they are showing up as available now through Eventbrite. I will double check and make sure they are on the section's website, and we may also follow up through email and through social media as well, just to make sure that the publicity is being shared with everyone. So thanks again, and we'll look forward to hopefully seeing many of you next Tuesday, the 17th, for our second webinar. Until then, I would like to wish everyone a great rest of the day. Thanks very much. Bye now.
Thank you.